Welcome back to another transfer tips video ahead of Double Gameweek 22. I'm going to highlight 12 players today to buy, hold, sell and skip. If you agree or disagree with any of these selections, then be sure to let me know. And the FA Cup games this weekend will have an impact on Double Gameweek 22, in particular the Manchester United and Leeds results, as we've covered already in previous videos. But that doesn't really matter too much because the selections made in this video won't be impacted regardless of if Man United and Leeds end up having that double in Game Week 22. So if you end up enjoying this video, then be sure to drop it a like. Let's try to get this to over 300, and we're still looking to push on towards 18,000 subscribers. We're very close to that goal, and we can get that very, very soon. So without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. First up is Eddie Nketiah, who is at 5.7% ownership, and he's the 5th most transferred in player this week. Only the 3 key United assets in Bruno Fernandes, Luke Shaw, Rashford, as well as his teammate Bukayo Saka are transferred in by more FPL managers so far this week. And I would expect this price to go up yet again to around 6.8 million before the deadline. And I think Nketiah makes sense for a lot of people in terms of our situation. Some of us might have Tony, who has Southampton at home in Game Week 22, so you'd keep him for that. But then afterwards, he faces Arsenal in Game Week 23, and is likely to blank in Game Week 25. Then you look at Mitrovic, he's an injury doubt, and he's been very underwhelming in recent weeks. Not to mention the likes of Nunez that some people still have, Martial, and regardless or without the likes of Kane and Haaland, it's difficult to find that third striker who can just fit in for the long term right now. But I think Nketiah fits the bill. He has a double in 23, great long-term fixtures over the next 6 and 10 game weeks. Arsenal are second in the fixture ticker, only behind Man United on both occasions, and Nketiah has some very good underlying numbers since becoming a regular starter. Since the World Cup in Game Week 17, he has amassed 30 points, 5 bonus and 4 goals. And if you look at all competitions, he's got 6 goals in his last 6 appearances. So there's a lot to like with Nketiah, and I do prefer the likes of Saka, Odegaard, even Martinelli if he's nailed, the likes of Y or another Arsenal defender. But Nketiah does make sense for a lot of us if you really want that third striker. And until Jesus comes back, which will still be for another month or two, in the meantime Nketiah will be very nailed on, and I don't think Jesus will be rushed back in. And as a result, I think Nketiah could be very good over the next 2 months. Saka is the most transferred in player this week among single game week options. His underlying numbers aren't particularly great when you look at how many games he's played in minutes, especially compared to Eddie Nketiah, for example. But Bukayo Saka is the 3rd highest scoring midfielder in the game. What I like about the likes of Odegaard over Saka, though, is that he's cheaper. But not only that, Odegaard is a bonus points machine with 18 compared to Bukayo Saka's 9. And as a result, Saka's only produced 1 double-digit return, a 15-pointer against Liverpool. There's been a few other 9-pointers along the way, such as the game against Man United, but in the grand scheme of things, the likes of Odegaard, I think, will still offer even better value than Saka. And Saka's on penalties, and Arsenal haven't had too many penalties recently, and that's still something he has in his back pocket. But Arsenal still have so many options that even if you don't go with Saka, it's understandable because you still will probably have some very good value choices in your ranks. But I have to say, Saka is definitely one of the best midfielders in the long term. I do prefer him over Riyad Mahrez in isolation, but in your team situation, it might make sense to go for an Eddie Nketiah up front, go with Odegaard in midfield, and then cover Man City offensively with Haaland and Riyad Mahrez. So Bukayo Saka is not a must-have. The same goes for Nketiah, to be fair, and it might have to be a choice of one or the other rather than both. If you can get both, that's completely fine, and it looks really good. And you could also add Odegaard to the mix, but you might also want that Arsenal defender. So it really depends what you're looking for long term. Would I go for 3 Arsenal midfielders? Definitely not, especially with my concerns about Martinelli and his lack of minutes potentially in the future, with Trossard knocking on the door. But Saka and Odegaard as a midfield duo looks fantastic, and you could also add Nketiah to the ranks as well if you want to triple up in Arsenal offensively. But my preference, and I've said this all along, is to have 2 Arsenal attackers, whether it's Saka and Nketiah or going with Odegaard, and then that one Arsenal defender, could be Saliba, Gabriel, Ben White, even Zinchenko's looking like a really good option at the moment, Ramsdale in goal. And that's kind of my preference, to cover 1 Arsenal defender or have a defensive coverage in that way, and 2 Arsenal attackers. Bruno Fernandes is the most transferred in player for a reason. His ownership is still under 8% at the time of this recording, but by the time we get to the Double Gameweek 22 deadline, I would expect him to have double digits in terms of ownership, and I think he could also make for a very good captaincy option. And regardless of how many people end up buying him, I still think he could be a fantastic differential captain, and you could even put the triple captaincy armband on him, as I've discussed in recent videos too. His underlying numbers are actually pretty decent, and he hasn't had any penalties this season so far, but you would expect it to be between him and Marcus Rashford. The reason why I mentioned Rashford is because the last time Man United had a penalty against Everton in the FA Cup, it was Rashford who took the penalty whilst Bruno Fernandes was on the pitch. So that's something to keep an eye on, but you would still expect Bruno Fernandes to be on penalties in the long term. He does love a double game week. He hasn't always hauled, but for the majority of times he's had a double, he's done very well. And with those two games at home against Leeds and Crystal Palace, I mean, there are so many opportunities there for Man United attackers like Bruno and Rashford to return. I'm not a big fan of the other United attackers, as we'll discuss very soon, but I also like the likes of Luke Shaw, and that is the ideal triple up in Man United, and that's why they're the three most transferred in players this week. Marcus Rashford, Luke Shaw, who a lot of us already have, but Bruno Fernandes is someone that might be difficult to get to. You might have a Kevin De Bruyne, you don't want to part with him, but I genuinely think it's worth going from De Bruyne to Bruno Fernandes. Then you could move Bruno Fernandes onto Mahrez or another midfielder who has a double in 23 and then doesn't blank in 25. So Saka or Mahrez could fit the bill, but I think Bruno Fernandes is worth having in Game Week 22, and you might even keep him in the long term because United are top of the fixture ticker over the next 6 game weeks, and even if you look to the next 10 game weeks, Man United are still top of the fixture ticker as well. So Bruno Fernandes is a worthwhile purchase. Let's see if United end up having that double. Remember, Man United and Leeds have to avoid a draw in the FA Cup. If they win or lose their tie, they will end up doubling in 22 for sure, and that makes Bruno Fernandes one of the most appealing options in FPL this week. Ben White can be a bit of a double-edged sword, and what I mean by that is him being subbed off early can play in your favour and go against you. For example, against Southampton early in the season, Ben White came off very early on, banked a clean sheet, and Arsenal ended up conceding later in the game. But it could also go against you, such as the game against his former club Brighton, where he was subbed off literally seconds before the 60th minute mark and didn't bank that clean sheet. So it can be very frustrating owning Ben White, and I can see more people selling him as the weeks go by, but it's not worth using a precious free transfer to go from Ben White to another Arsenal defender. And the only reason I'd sell him is if you don't have Luke Shaw and you don't have another means to go to Luke Shaw, or maybe another Man United defender that you really want, like Lisandro Martinez. So I think Ben White is worth holding, and I still think he's arguably the best Arsenal defender because the early substitutions can work in your favour. Of course, it didn't against Man United, but Arsenal had conceded already anyway, and he did pick up a yellow card, which obviously was frustrating as well. But Ben White, don't expect too many attacking returns from him, but maybe the odd assist here and there can happen until the end of the season. He's also very good for bonus points at times. We can't forget that. Literally the week before in Game Week 20, he got an 8-pointer against Spurs. So I think Ben White is a solid option. Just bear in mind he can sometimes be subbed off early, and I don't think it's worth doing transfers to another Arsenal defender when you want to be thinking about double Game Week 22, double Game Week 23, and also blank Game Week 25, and using your transfers to navigate those 3 game weeks. Overall, I think Ivan Toney is the third best striker in the game behind Harry Kane and Erling Haaland, but I think it might be time to sell him very soon. I'd keep him for Southampton at home, there's no doubt about it, despite Southampton improving recently, but then facing Arsenal away, Crystal Palace at home, and then potentially blanking in Game Week 25, I think that could be enough to sell Ivan Toney ahead of Game Week 23. You could also feasibly bench him in Game Week 23, but you'd have a headache in Game Week 25 should Brentford blank, and that would be the key issue. If it wasn't for that, I would just say keep Ivan Toney, buy him until the end of the season. I think he's a fantastic option. 110 FPL points is nothing to be scuffed at. He's got some fantastic underlying numbers. His XG, the big chances. I mean, so many of these numbers are absolutely fantastic. And not only that, he's got the goal output and the consistency to match. He's on penalties, of course. There's a lot to like with Ivan Toney. He can be very frustrating at times. Like he got that 1-pointer in Game Week 21 where we all expected him to haul against Leeds. But Ivan Toney, in the grand scheme of things, is still a fantastic striker. And I think a good move in Game Week 23, for example, is moving Ivan Toney to Eddie Nketiah. But like I said, if it wasn't for the blank in 25, which could happen for Brentford and Ivan Toney, I would probably keep him until the end of the season or until he gets that ban. Mitrovic went down in price overnight and he's now at 7 million. I still think he's a good FPL option in the long term. He does face Nottingham Forest very soon, and even that Chelsea away fixture isn't a bad one for me, but the big doubt about him is the injury. Let's see how long it takes for him to recover, and he's had these constant injuries and muscle problems throughout the last few months, even heading into the World Cup, and it's particularly that ankle injury that seems to be bothering him a lot, and he's still owned by almost 30% of the game, and I think he is a good option in the grand scheme of things, but a move to Eddie Nketiah could be on the cards, and some of you may be considering going to someone like Nonto in Game Week 22 and then just focusing on having 5 midfielders, and that enables you to go for Saka, Odegaard, Riyad Mahrez, maybe a bright midfielder like Matoma, and also an option like Bruno Fernandes, potentially Marcus Rashford. So you've got plenty of options in the midfield, and maybe you want to deviate away from free forwards. But I still think it's worth holding Mitrovic for the time being. Don't make early transfers anyway. If he ends up being injured and he's going to miss out maybe the next week or two, then I would sell him, but only to Eddie Nketiah. And if you want to go to 5 midfielders and have a benchable option up front, then I would go for someone like Nonto or Ferguson from Brighton. But really, I would keep Mitrovic for now, and then if we get confirmation of an injury, that's when I'd start to move him to one of those free options discussed already. This might be the most contentious part of this video, and I'm not doing it purposefully. It's just to offer a different perspective. And just to caveat this, I'm not saying De Bruyne is a must sell. I still think he's a good FPL option. You could keep him, but it might make sense to sell De Bruyne to Bruno Fernandes in Game Week 22 should United double, and then you could potentially move Bruno Fernandes on in 23 to someone like Riyad Mahrez, or just keep Bruno Fernandes in the long term. The reason why I think it's worth considering selling De Bruyne is because he's far too much money for a player you're probably not going to cap in, and he can also sometimes drop down to the bench. It's not going to be that often. I still think he's one of the most nailed on Man City players. He's got fantastic underlying numbers. He's arguably the best player in the league overall, but I still think there are better FPL options at the moment, despite him already reaching the 100-point mark. But Riyad Mahrez looks like the Man City midfielder of choice at the moment. You've got Bukayo Saka, Odegaard, and all the other midfielders I've mentioned already in this video, like Bruno Fernandes and Marcus Rashford. So De Bruyne is a good option. I really like him for Double Gameweek 23, where he could definitely haul, not to mention that great fixture in Game Week 25 against Bournemouth away. Good long-term fixtures as well to go with it. And even Tottenham away, I wouldn't be surprised if De Bruyne did something in Game Week 22 as well. But I think it's worth considering to sell him. You might have no other means to go to Bruno Fernandes, who I think could easily make up for a points hit, or as a free transfer, I think Bruno Fernandes could be your solution. So De Bruyne is not a must-sell. Let me make that very clear, and I still think it's a good choice, but I think it might be worth going for other options in the Man City ranks and also in the midfield in general, like Bukayo Saka, who we've discussed already in this video. It wasn't long ago that Salah was the best FPL option in the game. He was essential, unplayable, and he was our captain every single week. But things have changed. You can go into a game week now without owning Salah and not really fearing him anymore, because there are better FPL options who are even cheaper, not to mention the best premium in the game, Erling Haaland, kind of taking up Salah's role, just in a different position and in a different team. I think the main reason behind Salah no longer being the same FPL option is because Liverpool are dysfunctional. They've lost Mane and they've got some key players injured like Diaz, and it's been such a long time overdue that Liverpool needed to make key changes in the midfield to keep them progressing. Salah has dipped a little bit in general with his overall play, but I think Liverpool as a team are no longer the same, and it's very difficult for them to create chances, to press teams high, and to win the ball back in key areas that allow Salah to thrive. So there's a lot of different reasons. He's still got some good underlying numbers. He will still produce some big returns. You look at games like Everton at home, despite them appointing Sean Dyche, you could still back and expect Liverpool to win that game with Salah producing a big return. But having said all of that, I don't think it's worth owning Salah at this point. I would sell him even to a Kevin De Bruyne, to a Riyad Mahrez, or going elsewhere with Arsenal midfielders, Man United midfielders that we've covered already in this video. So Salah is a sell right now until things change. The last sell of this video is Matt Doherty, and he did produce a 14-pointer not so long ago against Crystal Palace. He started in the North London derby, but then he was subbed off with 20 minutes to go, and since then he hasn't featured at all against Man City and Fulham. The underlying numbers aren't particularly great. Emerson Royale has been playing really well in the last 2 games, to be fair. Arguably Spurs' best player in both games, so it doesn't look like Doherty will get his place back anytime soon, and even if he does get a start, I wouldn't expect that to be a consistent run in the team, and that is always been my issue with him. Even after his haul against Crystal Palace, I was saying that I wouldn't be surprised if Emerson Royale got a game in the double and then reclaimed his spot afterwards, which is what has happened. So Doherty is a sell. You can go to Arsenal defenders, you can go to a Man United defender like Lisandro Martinez, Luke Shaw, not to mention John Stones, and all the options we've covered in the best wildcard team video. Be sure to check that out, but Doherty is a sell. Becker scored in a 3-0 win against Nottingham Forest in the Carabao Cup, but his Premier League record is awful. 2 goals in 22 games for Burnley and Manchester United, and in his 2 games at his new club, look at the stats, absolutely awful. Only 1 shot, which was an XG of 0.02, and just every single stat you can throw at me is pretty poor so far. Very small sample size, so you can't judge him too much, but I think Weghorst is mainly in the team for his pressing and his hold-up play, two aspects of his game which actually looked very good against Arsenal despite the loss, and I think Weghorst can offer something else to Man United which they need, and he should start these games in the meantime whilst Martial is out, but I wouldn't expect too many FPL points, and he can produce in one game as he has done in the past. For Burnley, I owned him last season when he produced a 12-pointer. I think it was against Brighton, but in the grand scheme of things, he won't get you the points that you want. You can go for Eddie Nketiah, Ivan Toney in the long term, Haaland and Harry Kane, not to mention other strikers that I think will offer better value until the end of the season, including Mitrovic if he's fit. So I don't think Weghorst is worth it. And remember, you have three other Man United players who are absolutely exceptional in the game right now in Luke Shaw, Marcus Rashford and Bruno Fernandes. Patrick Bamford has been a good FPL option in the past, and he's got a bit of a mixed bag double. Nottingham Forest looks like the standout fixture, but at the same time, Steve Cooper has found his starting 11, solidified things, and Nottingham Forest have been a very tough cookie to beat. Obviously, they did lose comprehensively against United in the Carabao Cup, but I still think that could be a tough game for Leeds, not to mention Man United themselves, who have been one of the most informed teams in the country. But my main concern with Patrick Bamford is minutes. I don't expect him to start, actually, in the double game week, and I think he'll make cameos off the bench once there is no kind of risk of him aggravating an injury, as he has been injured quite often in the last year. Then he could get that start, and it could even happen in double game week 22. But my main concern with him is the minutes. He's very injury prone, and I think Leeds United offer better FPL options such as Rodrigo in the midfield and even Nonto in the forward positions right now. But in my opinion, Rodrigo's the only option that's worth going for. Maybe Nonto if you want that kind of cheaper striker and going for 5 midfielders, investing more money in that position. But ultimately, I don't think Leeds United is a team that you really want to invest in too much in this double game week. And you can use your precious free transfers for Man United players, Man City, Arsenal for the double game week 22 and 23, not to mention covering blank game week 25 and navigating that game week as well. The final player in this video is Meslier, who does seem like one of the best options on paper in double game week 22 in the goalkeeper position, but Leeds United are far too poor defensively. I think they have a championship backline ultimately, and they're going to concede goals. Meslier can produce the odd really big haul, but I wouldn't count on it in game week 22. I think Nottingham Forest and Man United will score against Leeds, and if you have Meslier in the long term, the fixtures don't get any better. You're maybe looking at a clean sheet against Everton or Southampton, but even then, I wouldn't be expecting it. So I would avoid Meslier and all Leeds United assets, with the possible exception of Rodrigo and Nonto, as I've discussed earlier. But if you want a goalkeeper who has a double in 22, then De Gea is the one to go for. United have been very strong defensively, and United have some good long-term fixtures, but Bruno Fernandes, Luke Shaw and Marcus Rashford is the optimal Manchester United triple up. I wouldn't make goalkeeper transfers right now, and Meslier is someone I definitely wouldn't go for. I would personally skip all Leeds assets. If you had to go for one, like I said before, Rodrigo and Nonto would fit the bill, but I would honestly not go for any of them. The fixtures aren't there for them. I think Leeds will struggle in some of these games, particularly defensively, and I just wouldn't go for Meslier, who I've seen some people clamour about. I just don't think it's worth going for. So that's it. We've covered 12 players today to buy, hold, sell and skip. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, whether you agree, disagree, or have other thoughts or players to put forward. I'd be interested to see. And thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe if you're new. Let's try to get this video to over 300 likes. Let's keep on pushing towards 18,000 subscribers. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and you can also become a patron or a channel member. Patreon.com/DylanRCM. If you sign up as a differential, the basic tier, at just £3 a month, you can then be upgraded and get the perks that captains and legends get at the higher tiers as well. So be sure to check that out. The same goes for the YouTube channel memberships, and you can also check the links in the description below for the FPL League and the Discord server. So there's a lot of stuff heading your way. Good luck for double game week 22. Enjoy the football. I'll see you very soon with more FPL and UCL fantasy content.